Hello, Bayit community. I want to share an idea with you about this week's Parsha, Parsha Vayeshev. This week's Parsha contains the famous, and when I say famous, I really mean it because there's a whole musical about it, story about Yosef and his brothers. Yosef is favored by his father, Yaakov, and his brothers are jealous. So jealous that they sell him off into slavery, seemingly never to be seen again. Yosef is then bought to be a slave in the Egyptian minister Potiphar's house. I want to pick up on a verse from that episode that initially doesn't seem so significant. It says, "On such a day, he, Yosef, came into the house to finish his work, lasot melachto, and no one else was in the house with him." This verse is setting the stage for the episode of Yosef and Potiphar's wife, which will then lead to his eventual jailing. And the verse just casually mentions that when he came back to finish the malacha, his work, that no one else was there, seemingly not adding much to the story. However, this throwaway verse appears in an intense back and forth in the Gemara. In Masechet Shabbat, there's a discussion about how many kinds of malacha, kinds of work there are. There are 40 minus 1, which is 39. But where did this number actually come from? One rabbi says it corresponds to the kinds of work that were in the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And then another says it's based on the amount of times the word malacha and its respective conjugations appear in the Torah, apparently 39 times. But then a dilemma arises. And Amora asks, but is it really true that it's 39 times? What about this verse, which maybe never got counted? And then he brings our verse with Yosef coming to do his work, his melacha. The challenge was serious enough that the rabbis, in response to his question, pulled out a Sefer Torah scroll and counted every single time the term appeared themselves. Why is this the verse that there's some kind of question about, as opposed to any other verse about melacha? Maybe it's coming to highlight something about Yosef's own connection to melacha, to work. In a few parshiot from now, we will meet Yosef again, and this time he will be viceroy of Egypt, after years of being in jail and interpreting dreams. Yosef will now be in disguise to meet his brothers again, who have now come to visit him, not knowing who he is, begging for food as famine takes over the land. In his preparation to meet his brothers, there's another description that is a throwaway line about his getting ready. And when Yosef saw Binyamin with them, Yosef said to his house steward, "Take those men into the house, slaughter and prepare an animal, v'hachein, for those men will dine with me at noon." Bereishit Rabbah picks up on that unusual phrasing at the end of the verse, and states that the hachein, or preparation here, could not mean anything else other than preparation for Shabbat. This means, the Midrash is telling us, that Yosef kept Shabbat even before we were commanded to at Har Sinai. It's a very odd Midrash. What is there to learn from such minuscule words like hachein that there's something about Shabbat? The Midrash seems to be part of this larger backdrop of rabbinic understanding of connecting Yosef, work, and Shabbat. Yosef, unlike any of our ancestors before slavery in Egypt, was a slave himself, bought by Potiphar to serve in his house. Yosef understood the toil and breaking of the spirit that comes with being forced to do malacha. He understood how such a position took away from his personhood his sense of autonomy outside of Potiphar's home structure. Yosef knew that pausing from that compulsory work is what ensured his sense of himself, and then instituted it for him and his household from then on. Now we can return to the discussion in Masechet Shabbat, which questions if Yosef should be counted as the source for the 39. Maybe this is the Gemara's way of giving the opportunity to highlight Yosef's story in particular, showing its inclusion as ultimately being necessary to count and therefore quintessential to what malacha and its significance in being prohibited on Shabbat is actually all about. May Yosef's voluntary taking on of withholding from work, from malacha, and his wisdom in learning from his own experiences on how to treat his own household give us new inspired meaning in our own withholding from malacha this Shabbat and in many Shabbatot to come. Shabbat Shalom.